Welcome to the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival Filmmakers panel. I'm Hingman Leung and I'm your host today. The Ottawa Canadian Film Festival is a cultural not-for-profit organization whose mission is to recognize, promote, and celebrate the art of cinema by showcasing Canadian films and filmmakers. The festival gratefully acknowledges the financial support of the Ottawa Arts Council and the City of Ottawa. This year, our festival is entirely online due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The films were split into 3 screening weekends, and we have just finished the first one. I have with me today some of the filmmakers involved in the films that you've just seen, and I'm very excited to get to chat with them about their films and ask them questions that you've sent in through our audience Q&A throughout the weekend. Our panelists are Sterlin Fernando, producer of Project Cold Days, Filip Lee, writer of Vessel, Florence Pelletier, director of Saint-Tite, Tyler J. Sagan, director of Advances, Taylor Olson, director of The Date, and C. Hudson Hwang, director of Miracle Baby. Before we get into your questions, I'd like to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a bit more about their filmmaking journey so far. So let's start with you, Sterlin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sterlin Fernando. I'm actually the producer for Project Cold Days. The actual director is out of the country at the moment and couldn't make this. I started in this almost by chance on a whim kind of thing. I met the director a while back at a party and we became Facebook friends. And then he put out a call out asking if anyone wanted to help him make a film. And I liked the topic because he wanted to do a film about the homeless in Ottawa. So I volunteered myself for it. And then over the years, we kind of worked on this together, and Project Cold Days is sort of what came out of it, and we're very happy and proud with the film. So I'm based here in Ottawa. And I actually live in the Byward Market, so I see a lot of the homeless around. And, you know, basically we wanted to be able to tell their story and humanize it. And also it's interesting being homeless in Ottawa because of how cold our winters get, you know. Think about how cold it is and how happy you are sometimes to be nice and cozy in your home when it's a snowstorm outside. Now just imagine not necessarily having that option. So we did want to tell the stories of the homeless and their resilience and how they survive day after day.
Hi, everyone. I'm Filip Lee. I am actually the writer of Vessel. I am based in Toronto, Ontario. I got into writing in high school, probably just in like drama class and film class, and I wrote a lot of really bad stuff, and then I met the director of Vessel, Ethan Godell, in university, and we sort of just hit it off as friends, and we talked about wanting to do sort of a short film that was like kind of a comedy, kind of not a comedy, kind of sci-fi, kind of not sci-fi, something that we really were kind of like watching at the time. And you know, it was just a great opportunity for me because I got to just write the script, and work with Ethan was great. He let me collaborate on set and everything, and I didn't have to learn like what a camera lens was and things like that. So I just kind of got to hang out, and it was a great experience. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Florence. I'm based in Montreal, and my film Saint-Tite, actually, we co-directed it and co-wrote it with Elizabeth. She's a good friend of mine, and this project was a short film. It's a fiction short film, but it was done over a few years. So it's set in rodeos in a small village in Quebec. And now lately I've been focusing a bit more on documentaries, and I have my first feature documentary coming out soon. Obviously, everything changed a bit because of the pandemic, but that's my focus as a filmmaker. I'm a bit more into bringing adventure documentary with cinéma d'auteur. So this is a bit of my new passion, but I think today we're going to talk about Saint-Tite, which is still a project that I worked on for a few years. So I'm happy to get it out in the world and talk about it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sagan. I am the director of Advances, was the short film with the movie. And that was my very first time directing a film. So that was a big, exciting project. I have lots of years of directing in live theater, and I've worked at places like the Stratford Festival, and just down the road from Ottawa at the in Prescott at the St. Lawrence Shakespeare Festival. But I hadn't got into working on films until my partner Helen Juvonen, who was also the star of Advances, began writing screenplays. So we've been collaborating a lot together. We've developed a real collaboration. We also worked together on another short film we shot later that year called Weed Night. We just put out a new one called Escape. So we're playing with the medium, trying to figure out exactly what we can do with it. My focus still is primarily on theater. I'm one of the co-artistic directors of the Guild Festival Theatre in Scarborough, Ontario. So we've been playing a lot more with on-camera work because of the pandemic. Obviously, this past summer, because we couldn't do the usual programming we do, which involves gathering large groups of people together. We explored ways of trying to find those sort of live feeling experiences through an on-camera medium. So that's what we're up to right now.
Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm in Chipuktuk, Halifax, on the unceded, unsurrendered land of the Mi'kmaq people. The Date was my first comedic short that I directed. Most of my shorts I usually have written myself and are more sort of character studies and socially themed. But this was the first time that I directed a short. It was written by my buddy Bob Mann, who him and I had acted in a bunch of comedic shorts or features together. And he wrote this film and asked me to direct it. And I almost said no because I was scared of doing comedy, but I'm glad I said yes because it was a ton of fun. My background is coming from actor first, and then I got into filmmaking. And this year I'm releasing my first feature film, which is called Bone Cage, and it's just sort of making the rounds now in the festival circuit. So I'm really happy to be here and be talking about The Date, and be talking about Bob's hilarious writing and all that.
Hi, I'm Hudson Wang. I'm the writer, director, producer for Miracle Baby. I'm a Toronto-based filmmaker, and this is the second documentary I've directed. But I didn't really actually start with the intention of going into documentary. When I studied film, I actually hated documentary because I think as a sort of young, idealistic filmmaker, it's really about putting your vision on the screen as opposed to discovering the story. So by happenstance, I found myself in documentary after doing a lot of shorts and TV commercials and music videos. As far as this particular project, it was the origins of it was we were actually looking for a particular role model for type 1 diabetes, and for some reason I've developed a bit of a reputation for doing medical-oriented documentaries. So through that, we were able to secure some funding and approach a number of different pro athletes to figure out who would really make a really good role model for this. So it's a really interesting combination of storytelling and sort of very in-depth medical and scientific health-related subject matter. So that's a bit of the background.
Thank you so much. Wow, we have such a great collection of people in this conversation, and I'm super excited to hear more about your experiences and your films and Florence mentioned that, you know, and some of you too, like talk about how long it takes to make a film. And these films that we saw over the weekend are definitely very, 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 very touching and impactful. I certainly very much enjoyed watching them, and I can't wait to hear more and to talk more about it. So we have received some questions from audience over the weekend, and let's dive right in. First, there was a question about Project Cold Days. So this is directed at Sterlin. How did you go about gaining the trust of the subjects of the film? How long did that take? And were there any people who didn't want to participate? So Sterlin, over to you.
Great question. It was actually one of the big challenges of making this film. So as I said, I'm sort of the producer. In the early days, I was kind of an all-around kind of helper. And the director, Stefano Coleman, what he did is when he wanted to tell the story, he almost kind of embedded himself in, basically. You know, he actually, you know, with the permission of the shelters, he stayed a few nights with the shelters. He spent many days hanging out with the various people at the shelters, and he really got to know them. And that was one of the big challenges. That's why you don't see too many in-depth stories about the homeless out there, because it's hard for them to give you that trust. You know, they've been traumatized. They've had various issues with media, with all the various support services out there. So gaining their trust was a big deal. And then also even just finding people whose stories we wanted to sort of tell on film was also tricky. Finding people who had an interesting story to tell and who are comfortable being in front of the camera. As you can imagine, they needed to really have a lot of trust in us to be able to do that. So basically what Stefan did is he was out there every day. I was out there as well, helping him out. And we just hung out with them and just sort of treated everyone as peers. You know, we didn't look down, they didn't look down at us either. And we just sort of all just kind of hung out, more so, definitely way more so Stefan than myself. But in the end, he ended up making quite a few friends, and they sort of saw that he was genuine and he had a real story to tell, and they trusted him to tell the story. And that's sort of how we gained the trust. And I guess I would say that the most important thing is to be yourself, you know, like don't try to make it some sort of weird Hollywood experience or anything. He was just, you know, he would swear, and he would, you know, we'd talk about how cold we are. We talk about everything going on, and eventually got to trust. So it took about 2 years, actually, of almost like what you would call like pre-production, basically. 2 years to gain the trust, find people whose stories we want to tell. About 2 years of filming, because we want to focus it on the winter. So we did it over the winter. And then it was tricky, you know, getting people to be there at a certain time and things like that. As you can imagine, there were some unique challenges. And then it was about another year of post-production that went into this film. So yeah, it took a while for the trust. And then I know you asked about
what happened when, what would you do if people, you know, you were approaching didn't want to participate in this project?
It's interesting, and maybe the other filmmakers can attest to this too. When we put a camera out with all the lights and you know, all the equipment and stuff, people just get naturally curious and they're fascinated by all that. And for sure, there are going to be some people who will totally shy away, and then there's others who are drawn to it. So a lot of the people who we shot were kind of drawn to it, and we did make sure that we were telling them like what was going on and what they were going to be a part of. And pretty much everyone wanted to be a part of it and wanted to tell their story. So that worked out for us. But like I said, it did take a while, and what you see on the film isn't everything. There was a lot of stuff going on, but what you see on the film is what we ended up capturing on the part that we wanted to tell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I saw that. See, Hudson, Wang, you were nodding along. Can you share some of your reflections on making a documentary film and you know, working with people who you have to gain the trust of?
Oh, what he said is absolutely, you have to put in a lot of work to build that rapport and to build that access, because the core to any really great documentary film is having that access to the individuals and the circumstances and those key moments that really shine, you know, a tremendous insight into what type of challenge or conflict that they're going through. For my particular story, I didn't have a very strong personal relationship with Corey, who is the NHL hockey player that we ended up making the film about. It was really basically approaching them and establishing our reputation and our track record of delivering, you know, really heartfelt and authentic films, and really making sure that they're centered around the perspective of the individual, but also wanting to ensure that they understood the parameters of what documentary filmmaking is, which is, it's not a, you know, it's not sponsored, it's not a scripted thing. It really has to be as authentic as possible and as candid as possible. So getting that type of trust and commitment up front was, you know, a huge process, particularly when you're working with a professional athlete who has, you know, managers and agents, and there's concern around, you know, the hockey franchises that they work for, all the NHL hockey leagues, all the different people involved in that. There's a lot of stakeholders that you gotta build confidence with, as well as making sure that they understand the parameters, that you're not going to give them editorial control over what is said or how that narrative goes. So it's a big challenge and it's a big investment, but I think, you know, again, those great stories, those great documentaries are really about having that depth of access. One of the main characters that is in the film is the young lady Shannon, and she had no idea that she was participating in the documentary. She also has a high degree of anxiety related to kind of some of the revelations of her life and her circumstances. And so it took a lot of work to earn her trust. And the component of her in the film, she actually became almost an equal primary character in the story, which shows an entirely different perspective to what is traditionally viewed as a sports documentary, which I think is important because, I mean, a female perspective on that circumstance is often not reflected. It's usually around a typical male athlete. So I think it really adds to the broader narrative, and it really shows the duality of the perspective, which obviously, you know, traditionally has been a little bit more male centric. I think for our subject matter, similar to the homeless circumstance film, we're dealing with a lot of things that are stigmatized. We handle topics as personal as infertility and mental health related issues, diabetes, and some congenital birth defects, which I think are very, very private. And I think it's very easy to go in and try to do a really sort of gory expose of that. And I think you really have to think about the individuals that you're focusing on and that you're trying to tell their story, and what the net message or impression you want the audience to be walked away with. And I think for us, it's really around showing a very positive and inspiring story. So I think, again, part of that whole trust thing is really ensuring that they understand what the intent going in is, and that it's not really some sort of sensationalist, scandal-seeking type of story. So, and I think it handles an interesting balance of both.
Mm-hmm. And this element of trust, I think, is important also for films that are scripted as well, because that's the rapport we have to build with our crew, with the actors and everything. It's trust and relationship in kind of a different sense. So thank you, Hudson, Hwang, and Sterlin, Fernando, for sharing kind of your experiences building rapport with your subjects, and kind of telling their story in a way that's true to their lives, and does justice to it. So this concept of trust and relationship building is actually related to the second question that we have from audience members. So the second question is directed to Taylor Olson for the date. And this question is about, someone wanted to know if you had hired child actors, or if these children in the film, who appear in the film, are related to the actors in your film. So over to you, Taylor.
Yeah, so we hired child actors. You know, it's an actor production, but it's it's different. They're called different things in different regions. In Atlantic Canada, it's called a MIP, a member initiated project. So basically everyone owns a percentage of the film. So that's how since we had no money on this little short film, that's kind of how they got paid, is they owned a percentage. But yeah, we went to my agent and sort of sent over descriptions of the roles for the kid actors and said, like, who do you think would fit these roles and would be interested in doing them? And then she sent along some tapes, and we kind of went from there and cast them. But the main kid, whose name is Charlie Boyle, who plays like the little kid in the film and sort of attacks Bob's character at one point, is sort of like a prolific little actor out here, actually, and has worked a lot, and has worked in Toronto and in Vancouver and everything too. So yeah, we hired them through my agent. Yeah.
What was it like working with them?
Oh, they're fantastic. They're all awesome. They all had a blast. I mean, I've had a little bit of experience on a lot working with kid actors. I had another short film a few years ago that was centered around a young child and her relationship with her mother. And then in my feature, I had a child actor as well. And I find from my experience that the best way to get a good performance out of a kid is to sort of make them feel really comfortable and like they're just playing and goofing off, and not realizing, you know, sort of they walk in and they see their mark and they have to walk to their mark, and sort of finding a way in between like the light and the camera and all this kind of stuff and the boom mic, how to make them feel like they're just goofing off with their friends. That's the trick I find, if they're a little scared. Yeah.
That sounds like so much fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
That it makes me think of another film. Saint-Tite had children in the film as well. So Florence, I want to ask you about your experience shooting with children. And also I had read that you had the involvement of some non-actors as well. So can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. So for Saint-Tite, first of all, for the children part, which was 2 big roles in the film, we did a lot of auditions in small towns, so asking maybe schools, and so we saw a lot of kids, and a lot of them hadn't played in anything before. So that was an interesting experience, because the main child actress, it was her first experience on a set, and it was a really challenging one because it was filmed during the actual event, so there was like a lot of people at the festival, and we were filming the film with a crew of maybe 10, 15 people, so it was a lot. But I think the way that it happened, why it happened and it went well, is because we had built a relationship with her beforehand. We did lots of rehearsals. So there was a lot of work done beforehand to make her feel really comfortable, and the same with our other child actor, Alex. And for non-actors, so what happened with the film is we wanted it to be as authentic as possible. And so because maybe the rodeo culture is far from what Montreal actors would know or experience in their life, we wanted to include some of the writers that everyone know in that town where we filmed in Saint-Tite. So we had talked to them a lot during our preparation, and when we were writing the film, we became, you know, part of their life, I guess. And so it was really natural for us to ask them to be a part of it. And so we wrote some lines for them, but we really worked with them so that their instinct was what dictated their interventions in the film in the end. And they also helped us with like little details, like the costumes for our main actor that was playing the main bull rider. So the, you know, little details, they would be like, oh, that's not how you do this. So it was really good to have them. And for trained actors that were on set, I think it was a real treat for them to work with non-actors because they really interact freely in a scene, and I think it was an inspiration for them.
Thank you, and that brings back, or you know, goes full circle on the point about building relationships and how important that is to have, not only with the people whose stories you're trying to tell, but also with the whole team, because it really makes the project like that much more authentic and that much more real. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And I remember, Tyler, you had mentioned that your background is in theater. So coming into a film from theater must be interesting in other ways too. So can you tell us about working with actors with the theater background, what that was like, and what you learned?
Yeah, because Advances was my first film. To cast it, I essentially called up you know, friends and colleagues that I had worked with previously, and so it was a lot of people from the theater world. One of the actors, Christina Song, who plays Helen's coworker, she was a regular on Schitt's Creek and Kim's Convenience, and so she had a lot of on-camera experience, but everyone else was mostly from the theater world. But it was interesting, you know, Taylor mentioned that idea of like making people feel comfortable and letting them play, you know, in terms of kids. I feel like it's the same with adult actors too, is that you really do get the best performances out of people when they're just playing freely with each other. So you know, what I try to do is have structure with the other actors a little bit more rehearsal, similar to what I do like in a theater studio setting, and a decent amount of time on rehearsal, and then, you know, once the cameras started rolling, just sort of let them loose and let them play. And what I thought was really fantastic was that everybody, because everyone is trained and everyone has a lot of experience, they were able to really like sink right down into their characters, and I could just kind of throw technical details at them, be like, oh, I just need you to look a little bit more this way, or, you know, just pause for a second, and they could just fill those with a lot of acting, a lot of character, a lot of intention way. So, you know, I learned a lot. I think they learned something too. So it was a great experience.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's it's so important to have fun on set. I've been on not fun sets, and I've been on fun sets, and it makes a world of difference when it's fun, you know, this project that you're working on, because making a film, like a lot of us, you know, takes a long time. And when you put so much of your blood, sweat, and tears into a project, you want it to feel good. or even in a challenging situation, like some of the stories in the documentaries that were being told, you want it to be something that you care deeply about, so that you feel like, you know, the story, or you're doing it justice. And that speaks to, you know, the importance of relationships, the importance of really understanding what's going on, and also having fun as a filmmaker. The final audience question, actually that audience question is for me because I'm also an audience member, is for Filip Lee, who is the writer of Vessel. It's not often we get to have writers on this kind of panel, so I'm really grateful that he could join us. And my question is just wanting to know more about the process of, you know, when people say, let's take the story from script to screen. That's actually a very long process, and it's a process of constant negotiation and you know, digging deeper into the story and understanding it. From your perspective as a writer, Filip, can you tell us about your experience with Vessel, how it went from script to screen?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting with writing because you sort of write this thing it takes on its whole life just while you're writing it. And then you take it on set and you kind of just have to come to terms with it becoming something else. And then you take it to the edit room, and then again, you have to, like, it's like watching your son or daughter grow up into a stranger. And that's a sad analogy, but I don't know. I think it was, I think for me, I was just really happy that on set, I sort of got to have my opinion heard. You know, I know with a lot of things in this business with writing, it's sort of just like, okay, thanks for the script. Like, we're going to take what we want from this, but ultimately, like, your involvement in your idea, ultimately the script is the writer's idea. The film is a story and the writer creates the story. But many times the script is taken and that's sort of the last we hear from the writer. They get their paycheck, and the director, the financiers, the producers sort of take it in their own direction. So I was very lucky that I sort of got to have a kind of impact, you know, to further the analogy. I was like a godfather or something to the film. And I think, yeah, I was just really lucky on set. You know, if an actor sort of took the scene in a direction that I sort of didn't really see or didn't really intend, you know, it was my voice that was very important, and it was my voice that directors came to speak to, and it was something that we both had to agree on if we wanted to move forward with the scene. It wasn't sort of just like, oh, I'm the director, so bye bye. So I was really lucky in that respect. Vessel was really something that I think in another world I would have loved to direct, but I'm really happy that I think with collaboration you won't ever really go wrong, and it's, you know, it's sort of the melding of two minds that I think can really create something unique and special. So I think, yeah, I think I was just when I wrote Vessel, I actually was very happy and surprised and very lucky that it turned out differently from how I wrote it, because ultimately I think when you write something, it's sort of dead on the page and that's kind of it. And I think the real art and like the real elasticity of like when something becomes like something very like nuanced and textured is on set, in the performances, in the edit room. So yeah, I mean, to speak generally about it, I was very happy with all the surprises and turns it take, because it certainly wasn't it certainly wasn't word for word what I wrote in the first draft, and that's great, because if it was, then it wouldn't have been as good as it could have been. So yeah, it was a great learning experience for sure in that regard, that not everything had to be like how I intended it or how it should be.
Thanks, Filip. I think actually some of the others have experience writing their films. I'm not sure if if the other people on this call wrote their film, but so Florence, you did. Anybody else? I think see Hudson, Wang, you did as well. So do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure, I can speak because I wrote it, but I co-wrote it, so I didn't want to mention that, which really helped to bounce ideas with someone else. I found, which maybe some other people might think it's not that good, but I think we got about, I don't know how many versions for a short film, but at some point it was a story of probably like 60 pages, and then it came down to 10 pages. So we kind of made it move from bigger to smaller, and then but it's always very interesting to see it play on the screen at the end. And I was doing the editing, so I think there's a lot of writing of the film that's done in the editing room as well, and I think everyone would agree with that. But yeah.
And see Hudson, Wang, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a little bit different with a narrative from a documentary in that we're not scripting the dialogue, but we are writing the narrative sort of arcs. And for us on this particular one, we had to do like 27 rewrites because Corey's story kept constantly changing. Like he was going up to the NHL, and then he was going down to the AHL, and we never knew what city or what league he would be playing in. And for an independent film like ours, like we don't have the budget to be like, okay, we'll just fly down to Florida and film in Florida for a couple of weeks. Like we had to write specifically where our narrative arcs, and we had many different characters that we had to follow to really ensure viability for the story, and that there was, you know, we were making the right decisions. And then we're also economically budgeting for what stories we choose to continue to pursue and which ones we sort of abandon. So it was a very stressful reality following sort of a very unstable pro athlete around all over the place, and really not knowing whether he's going to be playing the Stanley Cup Finals or not. So again, I mean, we had to explore and project where we thought those would all go, and then write in order to get the right coverage, and then to build what our pre-production timelines and all of our, you know, our costs and all our travel and scheduling would look like. So it was kind of a nightmare actually, but as a filmmaker, you learn so much just with the sheer need for agility and improvisation, and being very present with where that story is going. Similar to what, you know, they were saying earlier, it's like you have every intention of what you think the story should go, and then details spring up and you're like, oh, I got to follow this vein now, or this, you know, this event didn't materialize, and now I got to go down this path. So it really does challenge you creatively, and thinking holistically from a story and the entirety of those character journeys, as well as pragmatically, like, how do we pay for all of this? So yeah, it feels like hell, but in retrospect, it's like, wow, we actually pulled that through, and the story is pretty cohesive. So yeah, you always got to take stock of the end product, and really be compassionate with yourself on how much you went through to get there.
Thank you for that. We're now kind of nearing the end of our panel discussion. And before we kind of have a closing round of comments, I want to see if other filmmakers want to share any thoughts on what we talked about. So, you know, we talked about the importance of relationships, the importance of you know, digging deep and also working, you know, how to approach working with different kinds of people. So I just want to look around to see if anybody would like to come in with some follow-up thoughts before we go to the closing round.
It was interesting is thinking about writing and collaboration and following those stories. And you know, I wouldn't claim to have written Advances, but it was written in my house. Helen and I are both life partners as well as creative partners, and so we're, you know, constantly bouncing ideas off each other. And so in the same way that, you know, I was helping her as she was writing it, she was certainly a voice in the room while I was directing it, and of course in the edit. I think that's such a beautiful way of encapsulating like what filmmaking is about. I mean, for me, I think it's so much of a collaborative art form where you're trying to take a whole bunch of brains and a whole bunch of hearts and put them into a room together and see what comes out of that. You know, the actors to the crew, director, producer, like everybody adds something to that, and that's what makes it really exciting, because it's the things that explode out of that you don't expect.
Thanks for sharing that. I think, Taylor, you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just want to say I think it's so true and so interesting. As we were finishing post-production on this film, we got to the fine cut, and then I had to go into production on my feature. And so I left it in the hands of Bob, who's the writer, and Beth, who's the producer, and they're both the leads in the short, and had to leave it in their hands to get to the final cut and do the sound mix. Thankfully, I was able to do like the color remotely on the weekend, but it was really interesting because choices happened in the edit that I didn't know about until you know, I was done shooting my feature. So there's this little moment at the end where my voice is in the film and I'm directing the kid actors what to do. That was a surprise to me when the movie was done. So it's, and I thought it was a great, very funny choice that I would have never made, because I've never put myself in the film in that way as the director when I wasn't acting in it. So the collaborative process, like you're saying, Tyler, is kind of, you can get unexpected and really fun things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That was right at the end, right? When your voice was heard?
Yeah, that's right. Like as the credits are starting or something.
Yeah. I enjoyed that. That was a fun moment.
I have a question for the panel, actually.
Go for it.
How did, whether you made a narrative or a documentary, how did your subject or your talent respond when they first saw the film? Like, how was that reception? And I asked, I'd ask maybe the documentary film people first, because a lot of them don't see themselves on camera very frequently. And like, how was that whole process for you around them seeing the final product and responding to, you know, an audience reception to it?
That's a great question. I'm just gonna go right to Sterlin.
Yeah, so great question. And we did something that we thought was a bit interesting. After we filmed our initial cut, we screened it actually at a homeless shelter outside in December. And you know, like did the whole like red carpet kind of treatment, and invited everyone at the shelter to come see it. And we set up a big outdoor screen, and they got to see the finished product, and they were all basically really happy with it. And then there was some moments too where, you know, they reacted emotionally to some of the stuff that they've seen on screen, because this is their live stories that they're talking about. So it was really interesting to see all the different reactions out there. And I think, I hope like everyone felt that we tried to do justice to all the stories, and we tried to show all the different angles of everything out there. And we want to give a little bit of that Hollywood experience as well. So that's what we did when we did our first screening, to show people in the film, the stars of the film.
That must have been so impactful for all of them to be able to see themselves. And I noticed that in the opening of your film, there was a dedication to those who had lost their lives during the shooting of this film. And I'm sure that was it's so touching for those who were involved to be able to commemorate those who were lost during that time.
Yeah, for sure.
I think this question, we could also go to the films with children in them. Well, some of the films may not be intended for a child audience, but how did that come about when the film was finished? Let's go to Florence first.
Yeah, it was actually, I think for Saint-Tite, unfortunately, we weren't able to screen it with all the crew and the cast together because of the situation right now. So lots of like virtual film festivals, which is also bringing lots of opportunities. But I wasn't able to see the reaction of the child actors. But I did see that after doing this film, I've seen them in other productions, so I see that they're working and they seem to be enjoying it. But for us, they were 13 and 14, so I think they had a pretty good idea of what the film would be. The script that we had was, you know, in the editing room, we made many versions, but it came back to being pretty close to what the original script was. So I don't think it was much of a surprise for anybody, any of the actors.
And Taylor, what about the date?
I know from when a couple of the kids watched it, because we first screened, you know, in the fall of 2019 is when this came out originally. As they were pretty excited to like see themselves on screen. They had, you know, before, because they're all sort of working kid actors, but especially Charlie, who got to play pretty sassy, and she really enjoyed doing that because she's a really well-behaved kid. So I think she enjoyed that. And then to see herself, she was laughing. You could actually hear she was laughing pretty hard at the audience. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I want to throw this question back at C. Hudson Hwang. What about when Miracle Baby was finished?
It's been on a couple of film festivals, and it's been screened in front of both the family, like Corey's family, and then it's been screened in front of like the hospitals where some of the doctors were, and the response has been, I mean, they're all non-actors, they're all you know, screen people, so they're just so chuffed to see themselves on a big, you know, big giant screen. And I think, you know, it's a nice occasion to be able to share that, to represent them, and for them to see, you know, people who are living in the same sort of situation or have the same complexities, health complexities. Like, it's so empowering for them to see these people represented, and, you know, a very positive story of empowerment and what people can do, and be inspired by it. So I think that element also really played into the fact that the characters that we were able to follow and portray were able to leave a very positive legacy, and turn something that is typically kind of a, you know, a perception of constraint, or you know, a bias or a stigma, into something quite positive, inspiring. So I think most people walked away feeling pretty good about it. And again, that's really what it's all about, right? It's just representing their voices.
Yeah, that's really, it's the best when people walk away from the film feeling something, and feeling something good.
Yeah.
So in closing, I just want to go around, because, you know, since your film was made, the world has completely changed. There's been so many things that 2020 has been, you know, month after month of things that I completely could not have imagined. So, you know, things have really changed how people watch films, how people engage with films, how people make films. With that in mind, in terms of, you know, looking forward to the future, can you talk about, you know, what are you hopeful about in terms of filmmaking, and what you know, if there's something that you wanted to tell your future self, what would it be?
Okay, so I'm an eternal optimist. So even with all these challenges and stuff, like one of the things that I feel that maybe it's bringing to filmmaking is it's letting bringing the films to a global audience now. There's so many more people now that are looking at festivals and movies from other countries, who maybe they wouldn't have been able to come in person, but you know, they're able to see films that they wouldn't have normally seen. You know, I kind of like a lot of this technology, you know, streaming and all this allows you to see films, you know, like little ones that maybe you wouldn't have heard of before, and you look at it and you're like, oh, this sounds interesting, and you know, check out films that you haven't seen. So I think there are definitely a lot of challenges now going, like right now and going forward. But there's also a lot of positives that, you know, what is that? There's a saying where like, don't let a good crisis go to waste kind of thing. So, you know, it could be an opportunity. So I think I'm trying to be positive about it and hopeful for the future. Want to kind of say, you know, always keep trying, just get started. Like, you know, I know a lot of times people are going to be waiting for this perfect opportunity, perfect timing. And, you know, like right now it's not ideal, but you know what, just get started. And everyone knows filmmaking is such a long process that you might as well just get started and get the ball rolling on any new projects you might want to do.
It's certainly an interesting, yeah, I like to see it as an opportunity as well. I mean, assuming this pandemic goes the long run, I think, you know, as far as creativity goes, it's constraints, I think, can be helpful. And the idea that you kind of have to think of like newer, more unique ways to tell a story, because I don't know, I think you can't sort of have certain scenes, and like if you're going to make something now, I mean, good luck shooting like a party or like a, you know, things of that nature. So I think those kinds of constraints and unexpected things sort of force creativity to like sort of force creativity, I think. And I think that I'm excited to see all the sort of like unique stories and unique ideas come out of like such an interesting time. I think you look at like, for instance, like films in the 80s, and it seems like they're all in some way commenting on like the Cold War, or, you know, novels after World War II. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing to see how filmmaking and ideas like respond to, you know, such a thing that's impacted everyone. Like this isn't like a phenomena of like North America, like or any sort of particular place. Like I think we will see like a fundamental shift in like the kind of stories we tell and the kind of like ways of thinking that we have.
Yeah, I'm also looking at everything on the optimistic side of the way you can view it. It certainly brings the film to a broader audience, and but in another way, you don't really get the live feedback from people. But it's I think it's also a good time to hit pause and think about what you really want to do, and like really take the time to do it, which is not something we always have the time to do. And maybe take the time to write down your intentions for future films. So that's what I've been working on and trying to do. And yeah, I'm hopeful for the future.
Yeah, I bounce back and forth between optimism and pessimism, or optimism and maybe it's despair some days. I think a lot of that comes again from the fact that I'm running a live theater company. And so I find a lot of my days and a lot of my energy and a lot of my thoughts wrapped up in the necessity of gathering people together, the necessity of having to wait until we gather people together again. You know, because even with a film, you know, you all know it, you all experienced it. Like, there's nothing like being in a theater full of an audience and feeling them gasp and react. And there's something in that communal shared experience. And I'm really curious about where everything's going to go in terms of, especially in the community that I work in the most, we're all sort of talking about, like, how do you capture that sense of liveness? How do you capture that sense of communal experience through a medium like this, like Zoom or on camera? And, you know, none of us really have answers yet, but I think that's a kind of an interesting place to be, because there's no real received wisdom about it. People can't get sort of caught up in the way it's supposed to work. And so I'm seeing a lot of really interesting experimentation. And I'm really curious about where we can push our storytelling. You know, I'm also curious about the kinds of stories that are going to come out of this, or how it's going to change projects. So, like, for example, in March, Helen and I did a table read of a web series, you know, that we had cast and we're, you know, sort of ready to go on, and then the pandemic hit like 2 days later, or at least that's when the lockdown started. So you know, we sort of shelved that for now, and we're looking at getting back into it, or picking it back up, I guess. But something that we've been talking about a lot is how does this global event change the story? Should it change the story? Does it need to be integrated? You know, and I think these are all questions we're just all grappling with right now. And so I'm curious to see how everyone else is dealing with this idea of, you know, addressing something this momentous in our storytelling. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I'm releasing my first feature in COVID, which is really, I mean, that kind of sucks, I'll be honest. Like, you know, film festivals are taking 25% of the content that they were before, and therefore, like, it's two-sided, so that every film festival, if you get into a decent festival, it means that you are just one of the few, and that is awesome, but it means that you'll play at less festivals. So it's really interesting. Like, we're doing our European premiere at Camera Maj in Poland this month, which is fantastic. So it's like, okay, that's awesome. We're one of the few films in competition there. But then, you know, there's less festivals that we're getting into, and some festivals that took like 100 films last year are taking like literally 10 or 15 this year. So it's really interesting. However, on the positive side of it all, it does bring more attention when you play. And, you know, like for when we played and, you know, won awards or this and that at places, it's meant you've been able to lock distribution quite quickly. And, you know, the market is hungry for content. And it is interesting, you know, like how we're going to have to innovate in our storytelling. And I shot the first 20 minutes of my next feature in right before the pandemic hit. And now we're waiting until, you know, in the new year, we're going to pick up again. So it's really interesting to think about how does it actually, like, this is quite literally a changing that we were in the middle of, a project that we were right in the middle of. So it is interesting. And I think that distribution will be completely different for at least, you know, 2 to 5 years. And it's going to be really interesting to see how we market things and how we put our films out there, and how I think this next generation of filmmakers is going to change how we make films, but also how we market and distribute them.
Mm-hmm. So we're in production right now for a doc, and practically it's a big pain in the butt. The whole process, the cost, the timing, like all the protocols, it really is something to experience. So it's just really, you know, adapting to the change and being, again, as agile as possible. But it's really, you know, you're going to go over budget and you're going to have more costs, and there's going to be more time required for changeovers, and just logging down locations and stuff like that, getting permits is just going to be a whole bureaucratic process, filling out all the forms and what your protocols and what your safety measures and who's being trained and who's been COVID tested and things like that. It really is very much a process change. So that I'm very optimistic that will eventually go away, and the process of filmmaking will resume a little bit more back to sort of normal of what it was. The thing that I sort of lament the most, though, is I think the process of the community of filmmakers, because I think festivals like this are adapting and moving things online, which is great because it's now opening up for a broader, more international audience. But the community and the interaction and the tales of horrible mishaps, or just building those networks across other filmmakers who've gone through their own individual experiences and their own lessons around making their film and bringing it to light. Like, there's a bit of I'd say a sociopathy around filmmakers. Like, you have to be really committed to bring a film into the world. And I think there's a special sort of profile of filmmakers that I think we all kind of like, yeah, they get it. They know what this is like to water birth a film or what have you. And I think that ability to build those those networks and seeing, other filmmakers, or, when they travel their films to different parts of the world and stuff like that, there's such a strengthening of those bonds. And that, again, that always leads to potential, more peer-to-peer mentorship, or, collaboration, or just access to say, hey, how do I get a fixer in this country? Or how do I, I'm working on this, and this DP is being a pain in the ass. What do you, like, how did you manage that when you're filming your film? Like, it just builds that camaraderie amongst a very sort of special set of people with a very special set of experiences. So that's a component I miss, and I'm hoping that in some form or another that will resume, because it's you need to have a lot of resilience to be a filmmaker, especially an independent filmmaker. So you need a support group.
Well, we can start it right here with this group. Thank you so much to everyone for your time and sharing your experiences and answering questions from the audience, and also my questions. And this time has been really special for me to be able to speak to filmmakers of this caliber, and to get to know you a little bit. And thank you to the audience for watching these films. We have a second weekend of the festival coming up, so make sure to check those out as well. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the financial support of the Ottawa Arts Council and the City of Ottawa, which makes the Ottawa Canadian Film Festival a possibility. This year, again, we're online completely. And to check out our festival lineup, go to ocanfilmfest.ca.